I want to talk to you about the field of epigenetics and education, but I can't start just right there. Let's start with my belief in rethinking purported achievement gaps. I'm sure that we have woke teachers in here snapping their fingers in agreement because rethinking the achievement gap is something that's being considered throughout the nation. Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools has collected a comprehensive data set making correlations between educational disparities and living environments. Living environments. The natural world as a whole. I'm sure that doesn't surprise many people. In fact, that's the primary goal of the Charlotte Mecklenburg's Breaking the Link report, which analyzed data to determine if there is a link between social disparities and school outcomes. There were two demographics that was focused on: race and wealth. The study showed that the structure of a population you are born into determines your educational outcomes. Poverty, attendance problems; wealth, robust attendance record; black, entering school with less readiness; white, more readiness. I could go on about the disparities, but there's no need. We all know these. We know that our kids are a direct reflection of their environment. We know that there is a direct correlation between what we are born into and who we are. Each one of us, if we look deeply, can see the correlation within ourselves. Our environment makes all of the difference. I happen to be a positive product of the ghetto myself, and yes, there is positive products in the ghetto. But as Langston Hughes states, my life ain't been no crystal stair. As a special education teacher, I deal with a lot of kids whose minds have been deemed, like mine was, not by natural cognitive issues, but by their environment and the association that a particular environment brings, as deficient. Who's ever cooked with an onion? Well, if you cooked with an onion, you understand layers. Nothing ever seems to start from the problem. Even a topical abrasion of an onion has a story. So being critical of the educational disparities, I like to think of the data from research like Breaking the Link as topical. I started to do research to find root causation, continually asking myself as I read book after article after book, what is the disparities a part of? Which led me to look at educational disparities on a molecular level, which introduced me to the field of epigenetics. Epigenetics is the study of inheritable changes in gene expression, active genes and inactive genes. What do that do not involve changes in the underlying DNA sequence, a change in the phenotype without a change in the genotype, which in turn affects how genes are read. Essentially, how our environment shapes us from the inside. So, what does that mean? And how does that relate to school disparities and on racial and financial levels? A primary focus in the field of epigenetics is trauma. A field of epigenetics asks the question of what does trauma do to the expression of a gene? And we do know that genes release proteins and proteins create behavior. So now let's look at the educational system through the lens of epigenetics and trauma. Or what does an adverse stimulus do to the desire for learning? Like, let's say I came from the African diaspora, the transatlantic slave trade. What if I was brought to this now America's soil in bondage, subjected to the violence of perpetual servitude? What if at a point in my life I was not seen as human but as property, with no right of my social experience or my body? What if there were literacy laws that presented negative stimuli of physical and psychological trauma because I wanted to read? The field of epigenetics studies transgenerational inheritance from human trauma from intentional mass death and famine. But there is little to no research on the epigenetic effects due to slavery. What happens to a social group who's had a trauma of enslavement? Research has shown that the effects of trauma can be passed down from generation to generation, and the normalization of the behaviors are passed down too. That's epigenetics. How our environment shapes us. Is it possible that we are looking at educational solutions from a topical framework by looking at gaps? Should we be looking deeper? Disparities don't just pop up. In order to take a realistic approach to correcting a created divide, we have to be honest with ourselves and ask hard questions like, what is it a part of? No treatment for an achievement gap or anything else is successful when you only focus on the symptom.